First pictures of the famous Yankee Flying Tigers in China. For many months, their bullets held open the Burma Road, beating a deadly tattoo upon the planes of Japan's Air Force. Former Army, Navy, Marine officers, transport pilots, they're the last of the world's soldiers of fortune. Today, they're a part of America's flying forces fighting the Battle of China. Volunteering before the United States entered the war, these amazing young men have astounded the world with their deeds of heroism and daring. Their leader, 50-year-old General Claire Chennault, for 5 years advisor to the Chinese Air Force. His knowledge of Japanese aerial tactics he passed along to his American volunteers. Taking off from airfields literally paved by hand, the Tigers score for their first 90 days of fighting 470 Jap planes for 15 of the volunteers. 50 grinning Tiger Shark planes, wired together with spare parts from 50 more, were all they had to start with. Fighting in teams of 2, they concentrate their firepower. One reason for their amazing success against seemingly impossible odds. General Chennault mapping the aerial raids the Japs fear above all. American Flying Tigers. United News cameramen follow the fast-growing U.S. Army Air Corps somewhere in Australia. Powerful flying fortresses going into action as American pilots and bombardiers take off to blast Japanese concentrations pointed at the island continent. Leading the raiding party is Brigadier General Ralph Royce, Chief of U.S. Air Operations in the South Pacific. Inside, the crew relaxes as the squadron approaches its objective. Aboard another bomber and also at the controls is General George H. Brett, commander of all United Nations Air Forces in the South Pacific. Winging their way over the island stronghold, these flying generals have materially checked the Japanese schedule for invasion. Today, in their able hands, lies the strategy for Australia's aerial defense. Tomorrow, the offensive. The world's mightiest bomber plant is rolling. Henry Ford welcomes British and U.S. war supply heads Oliver Littleton and Donald Nelson. The schedule, 1 bomber every hour. Second stop on their tour of inspection is the assembly line of a huge tank plant. 6 months ago, sleek, shiny automobiles were rolling through the grounds. Today, grim, heavy weapons of war are being readied for service at the front. In Washington, China's Foreign Minister T.V. Soong concludes a Lend-Lease agreement with Secretary of State Hull. China will get more and more tanks and bombers to help Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. America promises all aid to her gallant eastern ally. On the Pacific coast, workers in a bomber plant get a visit from America's hero of the hour, General James Doolittle, the man who led the first United States bombing raid on Tokyo. Addressing the men who built the ships that rained bombs on Japan, the general said, "Thanks for some great airplanes." Cadets of the United States Military Academy assemble for their first graduation of World War II. Solemn and impressive is the ceremony as the youngsters receive their commissions. Today, as second lieutenants, they are ordered immediately to their regiments. For the first time in all the 140-year tradition of West Point, cadets go directly into the Air Corps. More than half the class electing to try for their wings. Its maximum wartime strength increased, the Corps has representation from every state in the Union, from the territories, and from Central and South America. Gone is the lighthearted, carefree spirit of peacetime graduation. Addressing this final assembly of their cadet days, the United States Chief of Staff, General George Marshall, forecast the role American troops are destined to play abroad.
We have our men all through the Pacific, in Burma, India, and in China. Recently, they struck at Tokyo. They have wintered in Greenland and in Iceland. They are landing in Ireland and in England, and they will land in France.
Final regimental parade. Those who remain behind pass in review before the class of 1942, marching in perfect formation, row upon row. The cream of America's young manhood, dedicated to honor and protect those things for which America stands, freedom and democracy. Always on the alert, U.S. anti-aircraft units report on the double quick to gun emplacements well camouflaged from enemy scouting planes. This coastal area has been hammered for months, suspected prelude to invasion. But the American marksmen are ready and waiting. From nearby aerodromes, United Nations pilots take to the sky in fast fighting pursuit ships. These are the men who are defending the aerial approaches to Australia. And here's real action. Jap plane spotted. In a matter of seconds, the anti-aircraft crews are letting them have it. Military experts from 17 South and Central American nations see an impressive demonstration of the United States' great air training program in action. 60,000 flyers every year. Their motors roaring defiance, this graduating class of young American Eagles are now ready to man the fighting ships of the Army and Navy Air Corps. Near Washington, a giant Soviet bomber stands poised for flight. Her passenger, Soviet Commissar Molotov. He came for a week of conferences with President Roosevelt. Secretary of State Hull and Ambassador Litvinov are on hand to see him leave. In London, he signed a new 20-year Anglo-Russian alliance. Here, he reached understandings on opening a second European front. The war's best-kept secret. Not until Mr. Molotov was safely back in Moscow was his visit revealed. The Ferry Command in action. American bombers arriving at a transfer point in Canada, aerial crossroads of the world. United States Army pilots turn the ships over to a Royal Air Force crew for the long trip overseas. Down the runway, outward bound. Canada, Britain, and the United States launching the greatest sky offensive the world has ever seen. A new technique in glider tactics of air invasion. The Army Signal Corps conducting the experiments. A rope is rigged for the oncoming plane to catch. here's how it's picked up without the towing plane having to land. Latest development in glider warfare. Filmed under fire. These are the first pictures of America's great naval victory in the Pacific. Army, Navy, and Marine planes, cooperating with the fleet, surprise a Jap invasion force sent to capture strategic Midway Island, stepping stone to Hawaii and the North American continent. U.S. planes roaring to the attack amid a rain of anti-aircraft fire. Below, a blazing enemy cruiser fatally hit, maneuvering to get away. Dazed by the unexpected sea and air assault, the Japs seek desperately to escape. The toll, 18 Japanese ships, cruisers, carriers, and destroyers, crippled like this or sent to the bottom. A blow more than equal to the defeat Japan suffered in the Battle of the Coral Sea. Back in port, Admiral Nimitz, who directed the action, bestows medals for deeds of valor. They fought the strangest naval battle in history, a battle in which the ships were hundreds of miles apart. The stories told by these hero pilots may rewrite all textbooks on naval warfare. They proved again and again that warplanes can blast battleships and transports. In one epic engagement, these men upset the balance of power in the Pacific. The lesson is learned. Today, American plants speed production of more and more giant bombers. For bombers like these played a devastating role, not only in winning the battles of Midway and the Coral Sea, but they're carrying their messages home to the Nazis. Operating day and night on a 24-hour mass production schedule. America giving wings to the greatest armada of fighting ships the world has ever known. And here are more men ready to fly them. Midshipmen saluting the color girl as families of naval cadets come to see their sons made officers of the fleet and the Fleet Air Arm. Today they march in their final review, the cream of America's young manhood, their lives dedicated to uphold the tradition of the Navy. Inside the historic hall of the old academy, they receive their wartime commissions a year early, for ships and planes are waiting. New fighting men ready to man America's all-ocean Navy. American bombers assemble at a secret airdrome somewhere along the northern tip of Australia. The order of the day, attack. General Royce and General Scanlon in command. One by one, the huge ships take off. Weeks of planning, months of training, now put to the test. big planes roar down the strip and zoom aloft at incredible speed. These are the fighters of the air fleet. Daily they go up and daily they land. From the looks of the bullet holes, some of them have made contact with the enemy. Battle scars that show that American ships are built to take plenty of punishment. Credited with staving off the invasion of Australia, these young pilots know their business. Here's one coming in now. His landing gear jammed by Japanese bullets. He's forced to make a crash landing. Dangerous with any ship, doubly so with a bomber. And he does a perfect job. All hands aboard safe and sound. The pilot is congratulated by the general and mentioned in official dispatches. Only a few repairs are necessary, and the ship will soon be ready to fly again. A thrilling example of how American airmen are rapidly winning the mastery of the skies. Physical exercise is an important phase in the training of U.S. aerial gunners. Strong arms and strong hands are needed to fire the powerful guns of a bomber. Hands and fingers that must be quick on the trigger. Blindfolded, they learn to take apart and reassemble each weapon. Climbing aboard a fast fighter plane, they're ready for the final test aloft. Guns equipped with camera instead of bullets to check the accuracy of their aim. Flying in formation, the gunners see the enemy exactly as they would from the tail of a bomber. Their job is to protect their ship from assault by diving fighters like this. Score 1, and when they land, the camera guns tell the story. $70 tons of airplane. The U.S. Navy's new $2.5 million experimental flying boat, Mars, now ready for her maiden flight. Capable of flying the Atlantic and back without stopping for fuel, the mighty Mars is a forerunner of things to come. The contrast between a Navy patrol bomber and the giant amphibian is striking. 4 monster motors, each with more power than a locomotive. Armed to the teeth, planes like the Mars can speed men and weapons to the battlefronts of the world in a matter of hours. These are some of the U.S. Army flyers who bombed Tokyo. General Doolittle, who led the raid, sees General Arnold, Army Air Chief, decorate 23 of his men with the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation states, they volunteered for this mission, knowing full well that the chances of survival were extremely remote. But they did survive, and they're ready to go again. Biggest reward is the family reunion. And here's where the U.S. Army trains some of those flyers. Ground school for bombardiers. On rolling platforms equipped with practice bomb sights, they learn the secrets of expert marksmanship, study the outlines of potential targets. Now they're ready to take real bombs aloft for an actual test. Student pilots at the controls, student bombardiers on the alert. Their objective, outline of a city, drawn to scale. Down go the bombs, sped to their target by the finest bomb sight in the world. Again they let go. No command needed now. This is the bombardier's big moment. Sample of United Nations air power in action on the battlefronts of the world. Convoy en route to Port Moresby. Troop ships in the Coral Sea with Americans and Australians bound for secret bases in New Guinea. Nearing port, a Hudson bomber of the Royal Australian Air Force escorts them into the harbor. With Japanese less than an hour away by air, troops of the United Nations are pushing out to meet them. Even as they go ashore, the alarm reports enemy bombers on the way. In a few minutes, they're over. Their main target, the transport. Close, but the convoy is safe. Now putting to sea with a U.S. Navy cameraman, we see a new chapter just released of the great American naval victory at Midway, the attack on the carrier Yorktown. Filmed under fire, the battle that cost the Japs 10 warships, 4 carriers, and nearly 300 planes. Damaged by direct hits, the gallant Yorktown steams on. Her flight deck ablaze, the crew calmly fights the flames as gunners keep up their withering barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Tracer bullets weaving a pattern of hell in the sky. Here comes a Jap torpedo plane. Watch the gunners get him. Midway, greatest sea and air victory in U.S. history. Today, more than ever before, the study of war begins in the classroom. Here are U.S. Army Air Corps cadets learning to be navigators. Curtain compartments reproduce movements of the plane in flight. The student charts his course with altimeter and compass, learns all the complicated instruments of aerial navigation. Boarding laboratory planes, they go aloft to check book learning with practical experience. Soon they'll be ready to pilot their own ships, lead their own bomber squadrons around the world. America, training a vast army of airmen to keep pace with the biggest aircraft production schedule ever known. America, building an air fleet second to none. Huge herds of cattle are turned from their pastures to make room for more flying fields. Here at a secret air base within the shadow of age-old temples, U.S. pilots instruct Chinese cadets in the art of aerial combat, and they prove apt and willing students. Transports, bombers, and fighters, together winging their way aloft. Blasting the Jap with bomb and shell, they're holding open the Burma Road of the air. Newest wingless wonder from the draft boards of U.S. aviation experts. It looks like an animated bug or a flying flounder. But from such radical designs as this come the airplanes of tomorrow. The inventor claimed 130 horsepower motor gets some 25% more speed in the wingless plane than in a model of conventional design. But will it fly? Here's the answer. A perfect takeoff and capable of making 3 miles a minute. Some bug. Air-minded America organizes its civilian pilots for patrol duty out over the vast open spaces of the West. Taking off on regular scheduled flights, they range the skyways, keeping an eagle eye on the lookout for trouble. There, down below, a plane that's crashed. By two-way radio, the patrol flashes the location of the wreck. Headquarters relays the message to a mounted unit, and in a matter of minutes, a fully equipped rescue party is on the way. Reaching the scene more quickly because of the air patrol, they're able to rush the injured pilot to a hospital. A dramatic example of how civilian pilots are helping America's war effort. And here's the U.S. Navy's bomber, the Boeing Sea Ranger, sister ship of the Army's famous Flying Fortress. Taking to the water for its first test flight, Sea Ranger is said to be the heaviest armed and armored ship aloft. Its cruising range is a Navy secret, but it'll carry a bigger bomb load a greater distance than any plane in service. Wings over America, guarding the highways and the skyways. The first in the U.S. Navy's great new fleet of aircraft carriers is ready well ahead of schedule. Completed in 15 months, she's sponsored by the wife of the Assistant Secretary of Navy for Air. Christened the Essex, she's the Navy's fourth ship to bear that historic name. Plane carriers superseding battleships as the capital units of sea power. Beneath a battery of electric fans, Texas fighter pilots don fur-lined clothing for a flight into the sub-zero temperature of the stratosphere. On the ground, it's a sizzling 110 degrees. And in these Eskimo outfits, that's hot in any language. Called Satan's Angels, these hand-picked steel-nerved crews have the toughest job in the Air Force. Schooled in high-altitude fighter tactics, their battlefields are thousands of feet above the earth. Executing perfect teamwork, they play a grim, exciting game of follow the leader through ethereal clouds in a world all their own. Flying machine gun nests peeling off into space. Satan's Angels, death diving for Uncle Sam. Promotion day at a U.S. Army flying field, somewhere in the West. Promotion day for a record force of aerial gunners, newly elevated to wear the stripes of Staff Sergeant. The commanding officer, General Robert Olds, impresses his air marksmen with the importance of their jobs. For in their sharpshooting eyes lies the safety of the bombers from attack by fighter planes. Squeezing into blisters or gun positions, they prepare to go aloft. The planes bear names which only their crews understand. Here they man the weapons that put the sting in the bomber's tail. Trigger fingers itching to let 'em have it. Now, in token salute to the new gunners, the big ships roar across the sky. famous American Kitty Hawk fighters are gaining quite a name for themselves with Australian aces. Here at a secret base somewhere down under, veterans of campaigns over England and the Middle East give fledglings a demonstration of what the Kitty Hawks really can do. Taking off from runways hewn from the jungle, they roar aloft. The camera plane recording their dramatic flight in aviation scenes rarely equaled. High above the clouds, they gather in the tight formation pursuit planes use for safety, quadrupling their firepower as they dive to the attack. Victory roll, the flyer signal to his home field that he has met and downed an enemy plane in combat. Now, swooping across the aerodrome at incredible speeds, they stage a show that in peacetime would be sensational. Today, it's all a part of the grim, deadly job of war. Australian aces writing history in the skies. America is building fleets of giant aerial cargo transports, big enough to carry troops and mechanized equipment to the far corners of the world. Called Commandos, the first of the mammoth airliners is tested by the Army. Just how many soldiers it can accommodate is a closely guarded secret of the U.S. Air Force. But this gives you a pretty good idea. Infantry of the air, flying direct to the scene of battle. Inside, they sit on specially built seats with parachutes for their cushions. There's still plenty of room for additional equipment. And here it is, scout cars rolling up the double ramp under their own power, rolling right through doors big enough to admit a tank. Commando's powerful nose points aloft. Her engines, mightier than any ship in commercial service, speeding 25 tons across land and sea as fast as a combat plane. Planes that will change completely the timetables of the world. The U.S. Navy speeds the building of giant, non-rigid airships. To special women workers is entrusted the handmade construction of the back. This is what they call walking air into the finished bag. Now it's ready for final inspection. Spotlights inside and out probe the surface for the smallest possible leak. Gondolas and motors, constructed in separate shops, are wheeled in and attached. The finished ship, blimp patrols spell death to enemy submarines, and the U.S. Navy is on the job. Flying Tigers, the famous American volunteer group, wing their way across China for the last time as volunteers. For 8 months, these Chinese signs have been the only insignia of the most spectacular and efficient fighting force in aviation history. Now, wearing the emblem of their native land, the U.S. Air Force, they become regular officers with American flying forces fighting in China. A Jap flag for every plane shot down. 200 in less than 4 months. Leader of the volunteers, Brigadier General Chenot, now promoted to command all American flying forces in China. Here he outlines the field of operations. With flags and souvenirs, a grateful Chinese people pay simple tribute to the airmen who have done so much to clear the skies over their embattled land. Clearing the skies for much-needed supplies. Supplies which in turn are exchanged for the valuable raw products of China. Losing no time, the new command plots the strategy of attack. By an elaborate far-flung system of Chinese listening posts, word is flashed, Japanese planes on the way, and the red ball goes up over the field. Signal for pilots to take to their ships. The Flying Tigers going into action for the first time in the uniforms of Uncle Sam. assigned pilots go with the veterans. Schooled in the fighting tactics, Chenot has proven superior. Roaring aloft, they seek the enemy, their flying generals still at the controls. The new American Air Force over China, carrying on the tradition of the famous Flying Tigers. Aboard a United States aircraft carrier somewhere at sea, Army P-40s, Tomahawks, or Kitty Hawks, the British call them, are now ferried to within flying range of their new bases, all ready for action. Army pilots who'll take them ashore get last-minute instructions. Wheeled to the flight deck, the speedy fighters are ready for the takeoff. Partway by carrier, then the pilots deliver them the rest of the way. Getting them into the air requires real flying skill. Cooperation between the armed forces. Navy carriers speeding Army planes and pilots to United Nations bases overseas. Wings over England, but these are wings of the RAF, American-built bombers outward bound for daylight raids upon the continent. Raids to repay the Nazis tenfold for their wanton attacks upon defenseless cities. Crossing the channel, low flying makes it harder for enemy observers and sound detectors to spot them. Over the beaches, movie camera planted squarely in the nose of a bomber for a ringside seat in an actual raid upon Nazi-occupied France. Only complete mastery of the air makes possible these daring daylight forays. Interested only in military objectives, they wing on to a chemical plant making Nazi munitions, and the bombardiers lay their deadly eggs. Over channel ports now, blasting docks and installations with 1,000-pound bombs, and the camera records the damage. Back at a base in England, night raiders get their orders. They climb into fur-lined clothing. This time, the goal is Nazi Germany. The schedule of attack, 24-hour-a-day bombings around the clock. They carry feathered passengers, a homing pigeon for every bomber to be released only if a ship gets into trouble.
All going on, just everything.
Sundown, the 0 hour. Powerful squadrons of 30-ton Lancasters are ready. Americans are among the crews, going with veterans of the RAF. At dozens of widely scattered aerodromes, blinker lights flash the signal for takeoff. And one by one, with split-second timing, 1,000 bombers roar down the runways, bound for the industrial cities of the German Reich. Barely visible through the haze, flying high above night clouds, they speed upon their deadly mission. Over the blacked-out objective, parachute flares light up the target amid a hail of anti-aircraft fire. Fires started by incendiaries flame like beacons. The city is ablaze. Arctic day, United States troops are on the move, streaming in by the thousands to take up strategic positions somewhere in Alaska. Alaskan Flying Tigers, commanded by the son of China's famous General Chennault, are constantly on the alert. Taking to their ships, ready for instant action, they're playing an important role in keeping the Japs from American soil. American shock troops of the Airborne Command, parachutists and infantrymen, practice an assault upon an enemy aerodrome, an authentic demonstration of the tactics of 20th century warfare. Carrying all of the equipment and personnel of a self-sustaining army, they move to the attack on wings. Parachute detachments lead the way. Just as in Holland, in Belgium, in Norway, in Crete, the element of surprise strikes the decisive blow. Their jobs to storm strategic objectives, cut communication lines, hold key positions until infantry arrives, and they land ready for instant action. Troop transports roar in with airborne reinforcements. Speedily, they unlimber scout cars and field guns. Swarming over the countryside, the infantry consolidates positions already won. The airport is captured and held. Practice today for tomorrow's actual test by gunfire. U.S. Army bombers loading up for patrol duty over the Caribbean. Bombers guarding the supply lanes of the West Indies. Guarding the oil tankers, bringing the black gold from the Americas to the United Nations. Aruba, the world's largest refineries, are protected by the Dutch and by the Americans. Refineries of one field alone producing more oil than any controlled by the Axis. Today, U.S. reinforcements are guarding foot of these vital West Indies, for this was the scene of the first attack on the Western Hemisphere. An attack made by a lone submarine, soon blasted from the water by the guns and bombs of the protecting forces. American-made bombs at an American aerodrome somewhere in England, loading up for a raid on Nazi-held France. American flying fortresses, manned by Americans, serving notice on Adolf Hitler that they are here to fight. Operating as a complete striking force, the Americans bring their own pilots and combat crews, mechanics and ground men, calmly, efficiently checking every part of the giant ships. 3,000 miles from home, and the Yankee sense of humor still with them. Every machine gun and cannon is tested before the flight. Now the crews assemble. Arriving on bicycles, they report to headquarters for final orders. Men from across the sea who have come to aid their brothers in arms, those gallant flyers of the RAF. It's the hour for which they've been waiting. Every face is tense as the operations chief issues secret coded instructions for combat. Outlines the raid, its objectives, what every man and every plane must do. Officers and men ready for action. Scenes duplicated day after day as the United States Army Air Force unleashes its squadrons against the Nazis. Well-loaded scout cars, the familiar American Jeep, haul them to the points of takeoff. Brigadier General Eaker in personal command goes with his men. Now, one by one, the huge motors roar. Many of the men have been over before with the RAF. Now they're on their own. From the general's plane, ships of the squadron are sighted as they cross the channel. Daring raids by daylight, and the objective, Nazi munitions plants in occupied France. Sighting their first target, the bombardiers take over. Bomb bay doors swing wide, and all-American TNT, delivered by all-American ships and crews, finds its mark. Gunners have work to do when the fortresses are attacked by enemy flights, but they battle their way through, and every ship returns safely to port. The general hurries to headquarters to report the latest mission a success. And again the crews assemble, this time to give details of their part in the raid. Grim, determined men, helping to smash the Nazi hold upon Europe's enslaved people. Yes, the United States Army Air Force is in the fight to the end. The President of the United States, surrounded by some of his grandchildren, pauses in his war tour of the nation to hold a family reunion in Texas. Then on to famous Randolph Field, America's West Point of the air, and the entire Cadet Corps lines up for a review by the Commander-in-Chief. At another Army flying school, student bombardiers soar aloft for a demonstration of aerial precision and marksmanship, nosing their way through fleecy clouds for a final test before joining their comrades in action overseas. Over the bomb range, the target grins skyward. This is their objective. Everything ready. Bombs are in racks poised for their downward screaming flight. The bombardier releases his load with split-second timing, and the result? Bullseye for Uncle Sam's bombardiers. Homecoming for a hero. Neighbors, friends, the entire town turns out to welcome the first United States Army man to win 4 of the nation's highest decorations for valor. Captain Alvin Muller, home on leave from war in the Pacific. The captain's mother, so proud she's breathless and very nearly hatless. The captain's father, adding his approval. Then down Main Street, Captain Muller rides with his wife. As pilot of a flying fortress, he distinguished himself in air combat in the South Pacific. 4 decorations for bravery and heroic rescues under fire. And even as these scenes of happy homecoming are issued, Captain Muller is back with his command, seeing the job through. In the Hollywood home of Movieland's Mickey Mouse, artist Walt Disney orders his famous cartoon characters into battle dress. They're in popular demand as emblems for the armed forces. Here's how an Air Corps insignia is created. This assignment is for the Marines Amphibious Force. A very tough commando tortoise ready for the warpath. And he comes to life before your very eyes. A Lockheed Hudson bomber, ready for delivery, is decorated with ferocious Pluto. The inscription tells the story. He's itching for a fight. In Canada, Montreal Stadium is the scene of one of the war's most colorful ceremonies. The first public presentation of wings to officers and men, graduates of the great Commonwealth Air Training Plan. "25,000 people are here to see relatives, friends, brothers, sons become full-fledged flyers. Each bomber crew receives its wings as a fighting unit. 5 men, pilot, navigator, gunner, wirelessman, and bombardier, trained as a team. Heroes of air battles with the German Luftwaffe are guests of honor. Air Minister Power making the presentation of wings. Past the reviewing stand, all branches of Canada's armed forces march in stirring salute to their new comrades in arms. Tribute from the Dominion to the gallant young men of the RCAF. In Washington, the Chief of the Army Air Corps decorates a hero of the war in the South Pacific. Colonel Sweeney, a fighting pilot of Marines, wins the Distinguished Service Cross for unusual heroism under fire. The colonel flew with those famous flying fortresses in the United States victory at Midway. Now, with a Medal for Valor, he's going back for another crack at the enemy. At New York Airport, another hero comes home. Lieutenant Moore, 1st Marine back from the Solomon Islands, is welcomed by his wife. A proud family congratulates the lieutenant who survived wounds received fighting in the Pacific. Today, homecoming is the event of their lives. For there's an addition to the family he's never seen. A boy, 2.5 weeks old, and just like his father. To Lieutenant Moore, decorated for heroism, dive bombing a Jap carrier in the Solomon Islands, blasting the enemy at Midway, was a mild thrill compared with his homecoming. Clark Gable, cinema idol of millions, bronzed and tough, is now an officer in the United States Army Air Corps. This is the graduating parade of his classmates. Enlisting as a private, working up from the ranks, Gable won his commission by hard work, and with it the admiration of the entire nation. Congratulations from the general in command. Today, as Lieutenant Gable, he plays his greatest role of all time, an officer in the Air Force of his country. Flying above the rugged peaks of the Owen Stanley Mountains in southeastern New Guinea, United States transport planes keep open an aerial supply line to Australian and American troops now taking the offensive against the Japanese. Native Papuan villagers stand in awe of the giant friendly transports that swoop in dropping food and supplies from the sky. Supplies that take 6 days to come by land, 20 minutes by air. Here are rare pictures of war as it's fought in the jungle. Loyal natives, intrepid airmen, battling and overcoming the wilderness as well as the Japs. Washington, D.C., the Joint Allied War Council in session. Marshall, U.S. Army Chief of Staff. Arnold, Chief of the Air Forces. Admiral Leahy, second only to President Roosevelt. King directing the Navy. With British and other United Nations warheads, these men lifted the curtain on America's dramatic invasion of North Africa, opening gun in the offensive to drive Hitler from the continent of Europe. The new theater of war, from Suez to Gibraltar, down the Atlantic to Casablanca, Africa's entire Mediterranean coast, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya. From Egypt, British and American planes launched the first phase of a broad and well-timed attack. Relentlessly, bombers blasted supply lines of the Nazi Rommel's veteran Africa Corps. On the sands of Egypt, the British 8th Army prepares for what history will record as the 7th Battle of Libya. Planning the action, General Montgomery and Air Vice Marshal Cunningham. For weeks, the British prepared with a thoroughness bred of past experience. For weeks, vast supplies and equipment have poured in from England and America. And as Britain's 8th Army grows, is reinforced, not a supply ship reaches Rommel. So completely are Allied submarines and planes dominating the Mediterranean. Then, in the black hours before dawn, Montgomery gave the order to advance. Guns were first to blaze into action. Daybreak, and squadrons of Allied fighter planes take to the skies. The most powerful air fleet ever unleashed in the Middle East. Montgomery's armored might begins to roll. The British offensive is on in force. From the sky, American and RAF bombers blast the enemy across a 40-mile front, unleashing tons of high explosive on Rommel's surprised and reeling Africa Corps. Relentlessly, United States bombers press home the attack, concentrating on troop transports and supply lines. Yankee bombardiers and Britons repaying the Nazis for the strafing of helpless civilians who once fled along the choked and bleeding roads of Belgium and France. So complete is Allied air superiority that the Germans offer little resistance. Sailing above and through Nazi anti-aircraft fire, the bombers shoot down Messerschmitts that challenge their advance. With devastating accuracy, bombs made in the USA spread havoc and destruction, take terrific toll of the shattered Nazi war machine. Outflanked, outgunned, outmaneuvered. Guadalcanal Airport, the tiny patch of land for which Japan has sacrificed a fleet of warships and thousands of fighting men, still bristles with United States bombers. For the forces that control Guadalcanal command the approaches to Australia, hold mastery of the skies over the vitally important Solomon Islands. Today, these land-based bombers are leading the way as the combined United States land, sea, and air offensive begins the task of sweeping the Japs from the South Pacific. No armchair commander, Admiral Nimitz comes all the way from Hawaii to decorate Major General Vandergrift, whose fighting Marines captured the airfield from the Japs and held it against all odds. Highest honors are awarded officers and men alike. Majors, captains, privates, they've proven themselves in the test by fire. One youngster has 10 Jap bombers and 19 fighter planes to his credit, one of the outstanding records of the war. These are the men who bore the brunt of the battle. Now, with reinforcements newly arrived, they're ready to push on. A mass of wreckage, tanks and guns marks the wake of Field Marshal Rommel's flight across the desert. Nazi planes blasted on the ground and in the sky lie half buried beneath the hot and shifting African sands. Matruh, once an important harbor, is littered with wrecked Axis supply ships, giant Nazi seaplanes that never got off the water. Somewhere in the Pacific, an unnamed United States aircraft carrier prepares for action. Contact with the enemy is established and fighter planes take off to attack. Guns are made ready. A Jap plane is met with a hail of anti-aircraft fire. Suddenly, an explosion on the afterdeck. A Jap bomber has scored a hit. Gunners keep right on blazing away. Firefighters and relief crews spring into action. But wait, looking aloft, they sight another dive bomber screaming in for the kill. As the deck crew seeks cover, the Navy cameraman filming these pictures sticks to his post. A gaping bomb hole reveals the damage, but it hasn't silenced the gunners. They're still firing away, and now they've scored a hit. There, blazing in the sea, are two Jap bombers blasted to bits. Now the carrier is fighting two foes, fire at sea and enemy planes. Calmly, the crew works to keep the flames from spreading, and they do a seaman-like job. Racing against time and the enemy, the carrier crew is magnificent. Port gun smashed with that first hit on the flight deck, the carrier flashes word to her escort, we're still full of fight. The flight deck repaired, all planes accounted for. Action in the Pacific with the United States carrier. Canada's newest light bomber, called the Mosquito, is shown to the public for the first time. Air Force officers are keenly interested. Built of wood, it's said to outmaneuver and outdistance many fighter planes now in action. Test pilot de Havilland, son of the famous designer, takes it aloft. And range, a military secret, the Mosquito is said to be the fastest bomber in the world. Even when flying on only one of its powerful twin motors, Canada's Mosquito bomber carries a deadly sting. The United States Army has a new and radical little plane, too. Designed to go wherever ground troops can go, it needs remarkably little space to take off. And it climbs like a shot. Carrying pilot and an observer or cameraman, the ship is highly maneuverable and invaluable for reconnaissance. Capable of landing on almost any field, the tiny plane can turn around and get back in the air in a flash. The infantry's newest sky soldier. gets a cargo of lightning from America. For that's what the Air Force calls these powerful new fighter planes, Lightnings. P-38s, reported to be the fastest high-altitude fighters in the world. Towed to hangars for final assembly and a checkup before going into service. Motors are tuned and tested by expert American mechanics, trained at the factories. Details of their powerful armament is a military secret. Roaring down metal runways in the jungle country, they're off to battle the Japs over the South Pacific. Lightning to strike the enemy. Somewhere in the South Pacific, a United States battle force steams upon its mission. Destroyers and giant warships forming a protective screen around the aircraft carrier as the squadron makes contact with a Japanese fleet. Aboard the carrier, pilots and crews assemble on the flight deck. All is in readiness. There, across the sky, Jap planes come roaring in. Still maneuvering his ship at top speed, the captain keeps the carrier constantly turning. Spectacular scenes of a United States naval victory at sea. Yankee guns and Yankee pilots are too much for the Japs.